Good morning. It's great to see you. I'm going to make myself comfortable. Today I have time. Yesterday I was supposed to put a 1-hour presentation into 25 minutes and got Dale all anxious because it took 27 minutes. So, so I will really have the time today to introduce you. I want to say one more time, I feel like a student who wants to get an A from a teacher, but because I've told Mayor Coleman at least 4 times how impressed I am. So I'll do it one more time, not to get an A, but to really say that I think you are unbelievably lucky to have a leader like him. I mean, he stayed yesterday, not just for a little bit of the time, but for the whole afternoon, from lunch all the way to the evening. And I just haven't met a mayor who does that. I worked very closely with Mayor Menino in Boston for over a decade, doing similar things as you do here. But despite the fact that he was totally committed, he had the mayor's ADD, because he would come, he would give a speech, and he would leave. And so for you to have someone who kind of brings people together is just very amazing. And I think the same holds true for Dale, kind of from the university side, and his whole team, and from the deans, and from, I guess, the football team. So I think this is all kind of very, very hopeful for what has to happen. And I agree that this isn't only about the Twin Cities, although I feel like we often think about the kind of progressive side of things happening kind of on the East Coast and then on the West Coast. But I really believe that what's happening here is more advanced in many ways than what's going on in many other cities, because just bringing in the players the way that you're bringing them together, and then figuring out how to build bridges between schools, after-school programs, summer programs, mental health services, and health services is just really complicated and really challenges us, I think all of us, to think differently. I'm not from Apple, but to think in a certain way as someone who doesn't just think about the branding and their organization, but thinks about the whole, and noticing that when we think about the whole, each organization really benefits as well individually. So that's kind of what the topic is for today. I want to start with something I'm not going to talk about right now, but I just read something to you, and then later on get to the issues that I want to get to. So this is a picture taken by a young person who is in middle school. It's a throwaway camera. It's a program I'll describe. And this is what she says about this picture. And I think this is a good start. And then I will read you something else that is supposed to actually go a step deeper. She says, many young children have passed on. They become beautiful angels. Honestly, they leave shadows all over the world with like these peaceful doves. Thinking of a shadow over a dove on a sidewalk represents a beautiful soul that was harmed. I'm Maya, I'm 13 years old. I took a picture of Jamal's shadow over a dove, innocent souls dying. I don't like violence, I don't like death. So the reason why I'm reading this to you and showing you this picture of a dove, which represents a place of violence in Boston, whenever there was violence, people in the community paint this dove on the sidewalk, and a young person telling us her experience. And I think this experience is what this is all about. I think she summarized it in the way that no one else can summarize as an adult. And I agree, I didn't feel criticized when you said that my talk and Kim's talk were not as good as the young people's talks, because you were right, because they were just absolutely amazing. And this young person is also absolutely amazing, telling us that she can't stand violence. Why can't people around her stop doing harmful things to other people? Why can't the adults protect her? Why does she have to do in school all the things that lead her away from that basic question? Why can't she be allowed to ask that question? This is actually something we do in the school. So with that, I want to move to a 22-year-old. And I should say, I'm supposed to talk about assessment. And one of the biggest compliments yesterday was someone came up to me from one of the foundations at the end of the day and said, you know what? I thought you're going to be a boring statistician. And I was so relieved that you're actually passionate about what you do. So this is like if you're waiting for the numbers, they're coming, I promise. But the numbers are a way to get to really the things that matter to all of us most. And I think that is the dilemma, and that's what I'm here to, in some ways, convince you that good data collection will get us closer to the experience of young people, not further away. And that evaluation doesn't have to be meaningless and just a thing we do for funders, but can actually be something that can help us manage our programs and help us create a system-wide approach. So this is Freddie, a student of mine, 22 years old, and he writes in an autobiography the following: I've encountered plenty of sharks over the past 25 years. Strong swimmers staking out territorial boundaries, hungry predators with row upon row of razor-sharp teeth, quietly efficient rulers of the sea. Unfortunately, most of them are dead. I'm not exactly sure what caused their extinction. Lack of oxygen, I suppose. Perhaps the water was a bit shallow. Nasty death that way. Poor, poor sharks. So Freddie had an alcoholic father, a mother who kind of submitted to the alcoholism as many people do in order to keep the relationships going, and a lot of abuse in his history. The father, when he got drunk, beat him. At the age of 5 or 6, he says now, this is a quote again, trust left my life. It just disappeared without a trace. I promised myself that no one would ever have the opportunity to let me down like that again. The only one I could ever trust was I, and it's been that way to this day. Now I'm jumping to adolescence. Adolescence was lonely. The only friends I had were my drunken buddies who were trying to escape their own unhappy lives. Sitting in a graveyard with cans of beers, wondering who would say the wrong thing tonight, get their lights punched out, let us know it was time to go home. My chance for a permanent escape came 2 years later, and I didn't hesitate. 18 years old and off to join the Navy. At that point, I'd probably have joined the circus if it ever came to town. Anyway, the Navy seemed like a good way to see the world, as if it's why I enlisted. No, it wasn't the fancy uniforms or the lure of foreign ports. I signed up to escape my life. It was that simple. I'm going to get back to Freddie at the end, kind of to have a closure. It is a actually happy story in some ways. It is someone who looks into life and sees it, and from the perspective of an adult student, he can see many of the things that happened to him. But I'm just asking us, in some ways, why I chose this piece is a question, which is that suffering necessary? And I think that it isn't. We cannot necessarily change his family condition. But if he would have been in programs like the ones you run, if he would have had the young adult experience or the adolescent experience, not just having to wait for college for that really important teacher. I would like to see that study, because I don't actually, much as I think you should find your son the professor, and much as I have my own experience that I had mentors that in college and really also in graduate school, that without them the world wouldn't have been as open to me as it became. But I think teachers at a much younger age have similar experiences with young people and can actually have the same effect. So I'm not convinced yet. I would like to see that study that we have to wait till college, and in college we have this kind of incredible experience, because I think it happens at many times in the life cycle before and after. But the point is that this young person didn't need to be in the graveyard waiting for a fight to happen to know it's time to go. He didn't need to leave for trust to leave forever at 5. He could have had experiences that would have made all the difference. And the fact that he didn't end up in prison, but in the Army or the Navy, is huge. I mean, it shows the resiliency of this young person. But right now, it's luck. In many cases, it's luck that he ended up there and not on the criminal side of things. And I think we need to kind of do everything we can much earlier than we do to avoid this kind of career. Okay, with that, I want to get to the socio-emotional side of things, which of course I was already, but I want to describe it in greater detail. So your superintendent of schools in Minneapolis was our superintendent of schools in Boston, Carol Johnson. She left you, she left us, so we're there also at the same place. She retired last year, but this is what she said, and I think she had the same impact also here, where she believed in the same things, which is teachers report feeling ill-equipped to respond both to the academic needs of students and to students whose life experiences have damaged their spirit and sense of purpose and resiliency. See, this is where we are. When we take a Freddie, or we take that girl that takes a picture of violence, we are talking about education, and we're talking about teachers having to live with those experiences and figure out what to do. And they are ill-equipped. We're all ill-equipped, really, also after-school programs and others. So what do we do? How do we actually bring the socio-emotional thinking to teachers and to the educational process? Okay, that's what I'm going to talk about. So I have a big problem with figuring out what we should call all this. I think you have decided here to call it socio-emotional learning, which I think is a great term, and there's a lot of work that has gone into it through CASEL and other organizations, but especially CASEL. And also Kim's work, who's really a leader in the socio-emotional learning domain. So I don't want to knock that term, but I just want to bring to the attention that we're putting a lot under that umbrella. Because what we're really saying is, so some people call it the non-cognitive skills. Heckman, and even though he has a Nobel Prize, he might still be wrong, because I don't think we're talking about non-cognitive skills. Because many of the skills we're talking about, like persistence, critical thinking, are cognitive. Okay, so that's one, but we're definitely talking about styles of learning. We're talking about youth development as it pertains to learning. That's one domain. The second domain is 21st century skills. So teamwork, self-awareness, all those things that people need in order to be successful. So that's another component of socio-emotional learning. And the third one is resiliency. Again, I think that the terms we use are not correct. So non-cognitive skills is not a good term. Soft skills is not the right term, because if they're really the skills that you need to be successful in addition to academic learning, we can't call them soft. They're pretty hard. And they translate into pretty hard facts like making money and having jobs. And the last one, mental health, is also, I mean, it's a nice term in general if it would be used correctly, but really what people mean when they say mental health, they mean mental illness. And that's not quite what we have in mind. That's why I think resiliency is a better term. The idea of adversity, the idea that we can address adversity, and that sometimes, normatively, not just for the poor people who have mental illness, but for all of us, we go through life with symptoms and problems. And certain points of life are going to be connected to mental health problems. And all of the youth, especially when they have a lot of adversity, will show a reaction. They will have certain sadnesses and anxieties, and that's just what we need to think about. That's just part of life. So what, oh, thank you, thank you. But it's very important because we had this big line between normal on the left side, and that's like 90% of the people, and then 10% who have mental health problems. And that's not a good model. I think diversity should also be used for the diversity in adaptation, for the diversity of how we deal with things. The new you can get me started, and I won't do this because Dale, I'll get this card that shows, I have 2 minutes left. Oh, it's okay, so it's you now. Okay. But the new Diagnostic and Statistical Manual takes this one step beyond absurdity. So, just an example. If you lose a loved one, you're given a few weeks of mourning, and after that, you have a depression. Now, it's true, the difference between anyone who has gone through a severe loss knows that when you're kind of adapting to that, dealing with that, you can't distinguish depression from mourning. It feels lousy and it feels like depression. You wake up in the morning, you don't have hunger, everything is off. But to say that you have a few weeks and it's not a disorder, and then after that it's a disorder, when we know that different cultures deal with loss in many different ways, just doesn't make sense. I think we can't just pathologize. That's one of the beauties of the socio-emotional, the socio-emotional perspective, because it's socio-emotional for everyone, not just for the people who have problems. Okay, with that, I just want to stay with the mental health side of things for a moment, because we don't want to just make socio-emotional development a new term for mental illness. It's very important for us not to do that. But it is also important to recognize that in your programs and in your classrooms, you have 2 young people who have been victimized sexually, typically, statistically. It's like the 1.2 family. It's not like we're not, cutting up kids, but the same is true with, you have probably 3 kids who, while they're with you, are suffering from some form of maltreatment that you know or don't know about. And 1 to 4 children have been exposed to violence, including indirect exposure to victimization, family violence, community violence. I mean, those are huge numbers, and we can actually decide not to deal with them, but it's not really possible. In some form or another, through behavior problems, to depression, through ADD, through many different symptoms, you will get to be confronted with some of this. So we better figure out ways to do it, and we don't have enough therapists and mental health professionals to deal with these numbers. So we have to figure out, whether you like it or not, the prevention aspect of out-of-school time is also a mental health prevention. It is really, even if you don't address it like this, it is that. So now I want to talk about the system. So if we don't have enough individual people to individualize personal issues, fortunately we have a system. But here's what the system looks like. And this is not my critique of the system. This is the Massachusetts Department of Education having actually mapped what is going on in surrounding a school or an after-school program. So a typical executive director of an after-school program, and definitely a principal, and also a superintendent of schools, will have to address these multiple domains, from health to smoking cessation, drug problems, child protective services, mental health services, after school, pregnancy prevention, all different funding streams, and it's really, really fragmented. And there is no way this can ever be managed, and there's no way anyone, any principal, can do this. So when you in St. Paul and Minneapolis are saying we want to create a system, I mean, you have a huge job ahead of you, because we're really talking about the integration of these things into a rational way. So I will actually argue a few ways how one can defragment the system, and that's what I will show you. So this is like, forget that. That's just showing you that one can actually make some organization around it, but that's not so important. Okay, this is what I want to get to. So this is the public health pyramid that is now used widely in education and in health. So again, Massachusetts, I'm using Massachusetts as an example. 3 tiers. How many of you have seen and use or, know about this approach? Okay, well, it's interesting. I mean, it's a relatively small group of people. This is when the CDC kind of thinks about illnesses. That is how they think about it. By now, special education has embraced this in a broad, it's called response to intervention, very broadly. And we at PAIR have used this for over 20 years, trying to convince the school district to also embrace it. So what this is basically the big news here is that for the first time, academic achievement is put in the same triangle or pyramid as socio and emotional and behavioral development. And in fact, what Massachusetts calls it is not learning, but health, so socio-emotional health. I mean, that has huge implications because it now says that the schools are responsible not only for the academic learning, but for the socio-emotional well-being and thriving of young people. I'm not even sure whether people who created this were aware what they were getting into. And because it's really, when you take this on, you better know what you do. So they're trying to actually figure out how to train people, how to reorganize student support teams, how to create partnerships that make this happen. All right, the other kind of important thing here is at the bottom, tier 1, it is all about everyone. So what does your setting, your after-school setting, have to offer on the academic and socio-emotional side that is productive for everyone? Like school climate, after-school behavioral systems that work, etc. The second tier are people, kids who are subclinical. They don't yet fail in school. They don't yet have psychiatric problems or other health problems, but they're beginning to. So it's called subclinical. And the top is the clinical level. These are the kids that really have serious school failure and serious psychological problems. And it doesn't have to be step by step. What you see here in the numbers, which is why I want to show you this and why I want to also gear up towards the assessments, is that only about 50 to 60% of young people today can be kind of seen as being with a relatively adapted, non-symptomatic, non-academic failure kind of trajectory, which means that 35% are beginning to show problems and 15% have very serious problems. And I mean academic and psychosocial and socio-emotional. Those are huge numbers. So that really has big implications for all of our work. So in the lingo of what to do, it's promotion, prevention, and intervention. So we do, on the bottom of the pyramid, we promote. We really create environments that are sturdy. Could I have some water? Sorry, that are sturdy and that by themselves are going to be healthy. And then we get to the prevention side, we get to the intervention side. So here are the kind of things we do: climate and norms, behavior systems on the promotion side. On the prevention side, it's early detection of issues so that you don't wait till there are big problems, and group interventions, and then at the top, it's individual work and crisis intervention. Okay, those are the three levels. So this is all to tell you that we got to have some way of providing services and understanding what we're doing, and this is one way of defragmenting. So Another way, or that connects to this, thank you very much, appreciate it. Another way to defragment is to use assessments. And this is where I want to, if you have these 3 tiers, how do you know who is on these 3 tiers? And how do you actually make sense of it? And how do you really get the data that you need? So this is where I want to kind of jump into the data side of things. We created 2 tools, which I will introduce to you as we go along. And here it's a little harder to be as passionate as I am with other things because we're getting kind of into the depth of some of the numbers. But there are 2 different instruments. One is called the Holistic Student Assessment that Kate mentioned earlier, which is a student support, a self-report. It's for grades 5 to 10. In the meantime, we've actually brought it down to 3rd grade, all the way down to 3rd grade to the 12th grade, but that's not quite as normed yet. It used to consist of 85 questions. Just last week, we brought them down actually to 40 questions. So this can be done in about 15 minutes. And it's done in whole groups, and hopefully on the computer if possible, but it can also be done on paper. And then we have a classroom assessment by teachers or by after-school providers. The beauty of this is that it can be done, it's shipped to us, we analyze it, computer guided, and within 24 hours the results can come back. The results can be analyzed on a student level, student by student level. They can be analyzed by classroom. They can be analyzed by the after-school program or the summer program, or it can be by the whole school or by the whole district. Okay, now I'm going to show you an example, what this looks like. And what's great about this is that it doesn't take a long time to explain to people how to use it. And there are lots of other issues we should talk about that are actually complicated. But what you should know before we even get into the actual case is a couple of things. First of all, anyone can opt out. This is not something kids have to do. And what we find is when we give them the freedom to do it or not to do it, like 99% of the kids do it. The same is with the parents. The parents push back a little more because they're tired, the famous assessment fatigue. So if this is just introduced as another assessment, another test, you get a little more pushback. You still get 90% of the kids, only about 10% of the parents who don't want it. But if you explain that this is a way to get to know your child, and for your child to have a voice in what is going to happen with him or her over the course of the year, and we want to know in September, not in December or February, what the issues are. This is a screen, and this is not a mental health screen to find disorders, but this is about really finding assets and strengths so we can actually get your child to the place where your child can actually thrive. You have most parents saying they want to do this. Okay, so here is a girl, a young woman, 7th grade, and we have 3 domains. And remember back to the soft skills and the non-cogs and all that. One of the things that is so important about assessment, that's actually more important than the results of the assessment, is that it forces you to say what you really mean by socio-emotional development. So I didn't say what words I like better. I prefer the word socio-emotional development rather than socio-emotional learning, because I think it is more than learning. It's learning, but it's also kind of the whole developmental process that we're talking about. But that's kind of semantics. But around the socio-emotional development, there's so many things you can bring together. What are the success skills? So we had to actually really decide these are the things we believe are the most important things. And we didn't just do this by sitting around a table and saying, hey, what do we like? It wasn't just a beauty contest. It was really going into the data and finding out what really seems to be the best predictor for future success. So what we found, or what we agreed to, was one box that is around kind of strategies of learning. That's the top left. Another one is around the concept of relationships. So from the kid's perspective, the quality of relationships with peers, the quality of relationships with adults. And then finally, on the bottom, the issue of thriving, resiliencies. So we had a number of different components to that. And I will describe to you a theory that led us up to this. So when we actually do this analysis, and that's why I'm saying I can teach you this within 15 minutes, and you could actually from then run with it, which is exactly what we do. We teach it, we train it, and then we coach around it, but it doesn't take a long time. What really is the hard part is not the delivery of this and the data analysis or interpreting. The issue is what do you actually do? And I hope we can have a time to talk about this. Like once you have this data, this information, what do you actually do in your programs or in the school? But this part is actually least complicated. And so what you see here is a line, and that's the Z line, that's the norm. By now we have 12 or 15,000 individual profiles, and we have standardized it, and so these are the norms we get. And so the orange, which is really red, it used to be red, but since we share the data with the youth, they have told us that red is not a good idea because red is very stark and bad and negative. So I don't know. So my team chose orange. I'm not quite sure whether that does the trick, but we at least try. And you see here that this young woman has struggles with critical thinking. The dots, when they're below the line, if they're blue or above the line, that's not statistically significant. So you can't say that she's much lower because you don't know. It's not a standard deviation above or below. She has very high academic motivation. Her relationships are positive and productive from her perspective, both peers and adults. And when you get to the resiliencies, she has very low emotion control, but high assertiveness, high action orientation, and what's very positive, also high optimism. And this is actually one of the scales, the optimism scale, that Kim in her approach and we share. So this is often a good predictor of depression, actually, when kids are low in optimism, so that you use that as a screen. So that gives you a sense of a kid. Now, I want to go to a developmental perspective to give you a sense of where we are, because I think you've gotten enough of the ideas about assessment. We'll get back to assessment, but first I want to describe to you a kind of youth development approach that I think is important when you do assessment to get to the next level of understanding what it's about. So the developmental model is based on the question of, so what are we thinking is the essence of what young people need in order to thrive? That's the resiliency question, right? That's the question we have to answer, and we have lots of different models and lots of different examples. I tried to develop something that's very simple, that can be used as a translation for after-school programs for schools for mental health professionals. So what we came up with when we looked at factor analyses, looked at lots of studies, were 4 domains. And those 4 domains, I mean, you can make them into 7, I don't care. I just wanted to have the least amount. You know, I'd kind of gotten my academic ranking, so I was like secure and safe, so I could now actually start making things less complicated. Because in order to get promoted, you need to have, it all has to be very complicated. So this is like a way to say, okay, let's really get to not to the 25 different domains of development, let's just see what can we work with. So we came up with active engagement, body, physical, I'll show you that. Body, impulse, hands-on. Kids tell us that they need to feel in their bodies. This is also nutrition, this is exercise. That's what many of them want. They often want, and that's really powerful and important, power, voice, choice, and leadership. This is really important to them. They want to feel a sense of efficacy. Lots of theories call it also autonomy. Whatever you want to call it, that is the kind of cluster or family of things kids really need and want. The third one won't surprise you and doesn't need a lot of explanation, is a sense of belonging. Lots of studies show us how important that is. And we hear it over and over and over again, the power of relationships for resiliency. And the final one is what we call reflection, which is a form of meaning, self-awareness, insight. So actually, we started out with adolescence, but when you take it the next step, we realized that this is actually positive mental health. So this is where we get away from a pathology point of view and really have to say, what do we define as a mentally healthy person? And our sense now, for Freud it was very simple, it was love and work. If you love well, you work well, you're healthy. Sure. But I think the world has become a little more differentiated, and I don't think love and work do it just by themselves. So the idea of having a healthy body, a healthy relationship to one's body, a sense of power. Now, I want to say for a moment, when I use it on myself, which is like one attempt to see whether a theory works, it actually is pretty interesting when you do it on, you should try it sometime, on a given day. So when I ask myself, did I today feel my body? Did I even notice that I was breathing? And unfortunately, the answer many of the days is it was so busy, I didn't even know I had a body. I was just kind of living somewhere else. And then no, I mean, it's really the case. And second one, like power, I asked myself, did I make a decision today? One good decision, or did I actually spend all my time spinning and obsessing and not really moving something forward? And the third one was like, was I my narcissistic self today? Or did I actually spend a little bit of time thinking about kind of the needs and the wishes of other people and do what I can do, namely take perspective, but that I don't do when I'm stressed. And the final thing is the reflection. I translate that into, did I learn anything today? And you'll be amazed how many days you go home and say, I didn't really learn that much today. If you allow yourself that question. I did all these things for other people, and I, did my yoga or whatever. I did some exercise and all that stuff. I was a good human being, but I don't feel like I'm learning. And if that becomes chronic, any one of these issues, and they become shriveled, we call this the clover model, so the clover leaves become shriveled, there's a problem. Okay, so that's kind of for adults. If it works for adults, and I think it does represent a certain element, you could enter into this spirituality, you can say creativity is another clover leaf, but we believe actually that, or have found when we also did some interviews and some studies, that actually spirituality kind of is along these lines. It's not just a separate thing. It doesn't have to be a separate thing. And also creativity. You can have creativity in all of these, and the balance is very important. Okay, now I just want to get to the next thing. By the way, how am I doing with time? Okay. Good. So I can actually relax. So I think when we talk about socio-emotional learning, we don't always talk enough about development. We have to, it's in there, and it started from a developmental point of view, but I think we have to make development at the center, because I think our whole enterprise is human development. And so when I started to apply this to development, I saw that actually these clover leaves, the way they're organized is in some ways by age or by stage. So and when you look at stage theories, Erickson and others, you often have the stage by stage. So it starts with a very physical side. You look at like young kids, and you see how these young kids really touch everything and experience everything. And that's why in their memory, Proust wrote, 1,000 pages just on like his memory of a young child, of wind, or of the smell of a cherry tree. I mean, that's like this idea of this, how wonderful. We can never get back to that quite, to that kind of magical moment in life. And that's kind of that early developmental period. The next one is middle childhood, which is really a time of competition, of competency, of industry. And then in young adolescence, it becomes really the groupie self. I often call it the we-go rather than the ego. So it's like, am I liked? Am I accepted? Am I in? Do I wear the right clothes? And all the kind of pain that comes in these vulnerable middle school years when you don't quite fit in and when you're not accepted by the popular group. And then it gets more into the middle adolescence, really all the way to college, around the reflective side. My identity, who am I, what am I about? So this is like a developmental point of view. But what I have found is that it is not a good idea to put this into stages. Because we never quite, I mean, this, oh, wait, I just want to show you this for a second, and then I'll show you a little video. Because really, those four elements are there from the beginning till the end. They're not stages, but what you see here is a way in which certain ages become a time of specialization. So that we really kind of we're kind of invited by this kind of amazing developmental process to hone skills in a certain way at a certain time. And I think this is very important for the skills, socio-emotional skills, to really understand what that kind of, when is that window of opportunity opening up? Because when that opens up, that's what we should focus on. So for the middle child, the 10-year-old, we should definitely build on that person's hunger for being competent at something and really addressing what it means to not be successful. I have a son who has dyslexia, and those years were so hard, despite everything we did in terms of tutoring and support and so on, the kind of sense of all these other kids can do it so easily, and I'm just kind of stupid. And no, he wasn't stupid, and now he's like an amazing artist, and but the kind of a core vulnerability is still there that could have been and needs to be addressed. It can't be totally solved, but it needs to be addressed through other activities where the child can feel super competent. Okay, now I'm going to show you for a second a little video. Can you do that from the, oh good, thanks Liz. Okay. So, I love to call this video, by the way, these are twins, and the parent, one of the parent is videotaping this. And I just always like to think about this, two guys at a bar. Talking about politics. So there is something about, you know, in terms of really showing you that these 4 dimensions really are there right in front of us, right? The communication, the connection, the belonging. These kids, independently of what they say, just love the communication. And they tell each other something. I wish I would know what it is exactly. Maybe you do. But one can only infer. But they're trying to really convince each other. So there's a lot of will and empowerment also. I'm going to tell you what I have to say, independently of whether you understand what I want to say. I mean, that's a whole second thing, you know. And then the component of the physical, it's all about being in space and time, like trying to, now you can see why people use their hands a lot, especially I find this also when I go to a different country and I don't speak the language, I use my hands much more. So it's I think, a way of physically trying to say, or if I don't feel understood, I kind of like yell into the phone even more, kind of like as if somehow that would make a difference. So, and then finally, there's definitely a lot of meaning making, even at that young age, right? There's definitely a sense of they're really trying to make meaning of something, but they're really frustrated in some ways that they can't fully communicate this. So that's I think, what I wanted to show you there. So now I want to bring it back to the assessment, because here's our dilemma. We have these really powerful theories that we need in order to understand what we do. But assessment's always going to be more superficial, but can we make it so it's meaningful? And so I want to show you one more, forget that. I want to show you one more example. So maybe we can do this together. I mean, I don't know whether anyone is not too shy. I mean, what do you see here? This is a 7th grade boy or young man. So you go down, and this is like the pre-orange. So this is still when it was red. So what do you see if you go by the high or the low? What do you see? So what's a low? What are 2 standard deviations below the norm, the red points? And I should tell you that on the right here, I inserted something we don't use all the time, which is a symptom checklist that is developed by Goodman. It's called Strengths and Difficulties by Robert Goodman. So you have here also something, but let's ignore that for now. Let's just stay with the resiliency components. Well, okay, yeah, depressed? Right. I mean, so, low trust, low empathy, low learning interests, lower relationship, but remember, this is not yet at the red level, so you can still interpret it, and it is lower than the norm, but it's not kind of like super. You can't really go too far with that. Yes, so the important thing here is that when you just use the symptom checklist, you get very fast just into the realm of what's wrong. And what we want to get to is, yes, we want to see where the lows are, but simultaneously we see where the highs are. So what we see here is the physical, the body, living in the body is very important to this young man, and he seems to be thriving on it. He's also thriving on emotion control, so he's actually quite controlled, but there's a problem around trust and empathy and learning interest. So what do you do? First of all, you want to know this in the beginning of the school year. Because one of the things that you actually find is when you use a screen, you get the information early on, and you can actually start, based on that information, to do something in September. And what typically happens is problems arise, nothing happens in the first month and the second month. By Thanksgiving, the teacher is saying we should do something, we should look into this. There's testing requested. The testing happens in January because it takes about a month to 6 weeks for the testing to occur. Then the testing has to be interpreted. The student support team has to come together. So really, in March or April, you get the results back. And that's when the school year is practically over. And what you usually get back is a more in-depth description of what the kids told you on the screen in the first place. I have attention problems, I can't sit still, I have this issue and that issue, and if you would address it then and there, you would get half of the way where you need to be. And so this is where, this is one thing, but the other thing is, in a case like this, you want to build on the kid's physical strength and prowess. You want to really deal with, get him into an after-school program that is sports-based. And you want to be sure that he has competency experience. And you want to figure out, not just for him, but for the whole school, who are the kids who have empathy problems, and what can we do about them? So now I want to go very briefly to how you can use this for your whole team. So this is like taking all the kids, and this is middle school, all the kids in the school, and you can kind of see how are our boys doing and how are our girls doing. And what you see is the very typical response, which is boys are a little lower in empathy. They're the ones with the dots. And the squares are the girls. And you see reflection, optimism, trust. No, trust is the same, but empathy are higher for girls. So now I want to go from there. So you have, again, norms for your whole program or for your whole class. And now you go to the next one. And now we have a specific school where the teachers have told us there's really something that's different for our girls. What is this? So we actually gave them all the HSA. And what you see here is something that's very different and very atypical. Namely, the boys from grade 6 to 8 are doing much better on various of these skills, almost all of them. And then look at the girls in relationship to peer relations and relationship to adults. They're much lower. In this case, I didn't want to make it too complicated with the dots, the color, and so on, but this is definitely, with the peers, a kind of red or orange dot. So here again, what you can do is rather than just individualize this, you can actually go for the whole group, for your whole team, and say, what are we going to do? It seems to be that the girls are telling us they have certain issues and problems. How are we going to address them collectively? And maybe I can do this last part I will do, because there are two more slides on, on how you can use this data retrospectively, where you can ask the kids, how did you change on these dimensions? And what we find are very interesting results that I can tell you later. I did talk to you about both a kind of child and an adult version. So what I want to show you and end with is the dashboard that comes from the rating of the adults of their group. So what we do there is that you can, like if you have a program, you can actually start rating from the adult side how your group is doing. So you don't just build on the kids' response. And so this is the profile where you can see, this is a shorter profile. Again, I can show it to you later in greater depth, but what this really means is that you get a sense on the right top, like where is my group? And in this case, active engagement, belonging are normed, are kind of very much like the norm. This group is very high on reflection. This is like a fifth grade classroom, but they're very low on assertiveness. So these kids need to have leadership experiences, they need to have voice. What can we do as a teacher? What can I do as a teacher or as an after-school provider to actually bring that up for my whole group? And then you have the pyramid again, and you kind of place in a certain way the kids at these different pyramid levels, so that not in order to pathologize them, but in order to figure out what services do I need to put in place for these children. So with that, I promised I would go back to Freddie. So I just want to end with, I just have to bring it up. Here it is. Okay. So, what happened to Freddie? and how does it relate to kind of the topic here? So let me just read you a couple of paragraphs. And the thing I'd never figured on was the fact that my life wasn't as disposable as I had wished it would be. All those feelings of anger and hatred that grew out of my childhood and adolescence were right there with me on that ship in the middle of the ocean. The madness that filled the house in which I was raised still haunted me. My escape was a failure, just another failure in a long line of failures. I thought back on the disappointments in my life. When would it ever end? Could I ever find happiness? Would I even recognize it when it happened, if it happened? I'm not sure that any answer comes to me at this time or since. I'm not sure that answers are the answers. What did change was my perception of my problems. I took ownership for the anger, the pain, the sadness, and the disappointment. Where they came from wasn't nearly as important to me as the fact that they were there. I had to stop running from the past and start living in the here and now. I'm still chipping away at the ice surrounding my heart, trying to love myself and those I meet. It's not easy, but I never expected it would be. Sometimes I rely too much on the anger of the past to fuel my present goals, and I can still get caught up in reacting rather than acting. But most of the time, I feel pretty comfortable with who I am. Trust remains a major issue for me. At least I can say that I'm aware of the deficit and that I'm working on it. I suppose the process of growing up never really ends, does it? And as for the sharks, well, I'm willing to give them a chance. That is, I think I'm ready to leave the false security of the shores of isolation and venture into the life-giving waters in which the sharks swim and breathe and love, and hopefully survive. So with that, I just want to really take that whole step from these little boys kind of talking to each other, and really when you allow them to thrive, how beautiful they will be in adolescence and adulthood, and what it is to damage a child, and how much one can continuously work on that, though, and to have the reflection leaf be kind of the guider of making sense through one's biography to really make this happen. But my hope is that in our joint work, that what we're really about is to prevent as much as we can those lives where this person has to live for 10, 15 years through hell in order to get to a place of insight, and where we can actually create from the beginning the foundation for a healthy life. And finally, assessments, if they help us really find those children we need to help and help us guide the kind of thriving and the way that we can support their socio-emotional well-being so that they can remain trusting individuals and cooperative and in relationships, then it's all worth it. And in that spirit, I kind of offer the assessments to you. Thank you.